The snow came early that year in Sioux Falls. It blanketed everything in a hush, as if nature itself was bracing for something terrible. Camila stood at the edge of the kitchen, her hands trembling just slightly as she wiped the same clean countertop for the third time. She hadn't heard the garage door close, and yet, there he was, Brody. Coat still on, boots dripping slush on the hardwood floor. He didn't look at her. Just walked to the dining table, set his leather briefcase down with practiced coldness, and handed her an envelope. She stared at it, the cold seeping from his gloves still lingering on the paper. Her name was typed neatly. Formal. Foreign. Divorce? She asked, not out of surprise, but to confirm the nightmare wasn't imagined. He didn't answer. Just turned and walked to the pantry, pulling out the last of the good coffee, the Colombian kind she bought on special from the Latin market downtown. The irony of that didn't escape her. Brody had always preferred black drip coffee with no sugar, bitter and unforgiving, just like him in the last 6 months. Camila had arrived in South Dakota 3 years earlier on a marriage visa. They met in New York when she was working part-time as a cleaner at the hotel he frequented for conferences. He was charming back then. Said he loved how pure and untouched her Spanish was. Said she reminded him of something real in a world full of fake things. Now she was just something inconvenient. I need you out by next week, he said casually, sipping the coffee. I'll give you until Friday. She blinked, heart hammering, a chill running down her arms that had nothing to do with the weather. I don't understand. I thought. He cut her off. You'll understand when you read the papers. Her fingers fumbled with the envelope. Inside, everything was perfectly organized. His lawyer had made sure of it, property divisions, a list of furniture he was keeping, a note stating he would not contest spousal support because they had no kids. The final line was marked in bold, Camila Moreno to vacate the property within 7 days of notice. There was something else, a handwritten note attached with a paperclip. Not part of the legal documentation. Just a scribble in Brody's unmistakable print. Also, you might want to check your status. I made a few calls. It didn't click at first. What kind of status? Her immigration status was solid, wasn't it? That night, she found out what he meant. A call came from a blocked number around 11:40 p.m. She almost didn't answer, but something in her gut said this wasn't the night for ignoring instincts. Is this Camila Moreno? The voice asked. Yes. This is Officer Delaney with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We have received a report that your marriage may no longer be valid under the terms of your visa. We'd like to ask you a few questions. Her world went quiet. That was the moment everything snapped into focus. Brody hadn't just filed for divorce. He had filed for her erasure. Camila sat on the edge of the bathtub hours later, phone screen glowing with names she hadn't dialed in years, people from Bogota, friends she used to study English with, a cousin who worked in Miami. But there was no one local. No one who could help her understand how quickly everything was unraveling. The snow outside had grown thicker. She didn't know where she'd sleep tomorrow. She didn't know what was coming for her next. All she knew was that the man she thought had rescued her had, in fact, laid the perfect trap. As Brody sat alone at the kitchen table sipping from her favorite mug, the one with the cracked lip she insisted on keeping, he looked out into the dark yard, expression unreadable. He didn't know Camila had kept copies of everything. He didn't know she had secrets of her own. The snowstorm had worsened overnight. South Dakota could be cruel in the winter, especially to those without shelter or a plan. Camila's hands were stiff as she shoved clothes into a second-hand suitcase, each item packed with a tremble she couldn't suppress. Brody had left early. No goodbye. No confrontation. Just silence. It was silence that frightened her more than rage. The morning light cast a cold glow across the kitchen where they'd once danced to old cumbia music. Where he'd kissed her forehead and told her she'd never have to worry again. Now, everything echoed. A part of her still hoped it was a misunderstanding, that the immigration officer had the wrong name, the wrong file. But by 10 a.m., she knew better. A white SUV with government plates parked across the street. It hadn't moved in over an hour. Camila didn't know much about ICE, but she'd seen enough. Friends in other states who disappeared in the night. A cousin in Nevada who was deported even with a pending green card renewal. She didn't have the luxury of waiting it out. She grabbed the envelope of documents she'd hidden months ago, marriage certificates, bank statements, tax filings, even screenshots of old texts where Brody declared his love. Proof. At least, she thought it was. But even she could see the cracks now. Brody had been preparing. She found papers in the trash that morning, shredded meticulously but not fully destroyed. One corner of a letter from a divorce lawyer dated 4 months ago. A receipt for a call made to an immigration hotline. This wasn't sudden. He'd planned it. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Voicemail. She listened. It was the officer again. This time with a tone that made her stomach churn. Ms. Moreno, this is Officer Delaney again. We need to speak with you as soon as possible regarding your adjustment of status. We'd prefer to resolve this quickly. Please contact us before 5 p.m. today. It was phrased politely, but the threat was unmistakable. By noon, Camila stood outside the St. Margaret's Community Center. It was the only place she remembered from when she first arrived. A church had hosted English classes there. She was hoping for a familiar face, someone who could guide her. The front desk volunteer, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and tired hands, listened without judgment. My name is Nancy, she said softly. We've seen this kind of thing before. Camila blinked. Really? More often than you'd think. You'll need legal help. And fast. Nancy walked her to a side office, printed a list of immigration aid clinics, circled 3, and handed her a scarf. You're going to need this more than I do. Camila's hands closed around it, throat tight with something between gratitude and humiliation. Then, for the first time in days, she cried. Not quietly. Not politely. She wept like someone whose home had been set on fire and was still holding the matchstick. Brody returned home that evening to find the guest bedroom stripped. Camila hadn't touched the master bedroom. She'd left the bed made, the dresser untouched, even the perfume on the shelf. There was a note, though, not dramatic, just a single sentence, "You've taken enough from me. You won't take what's left." He crumpled it without reading it twice. By now, Camila was 3 miles away in a dimly lit basement shelter, sharing a cot with a family of 4 who barely spoke English. But warmth didn't need translation. The father handed her a bowl of soup without asking questions. The mother smiled and tucked a blanket around her shoulders. The kids? They laughed. Loudly. As if the world weren't cruel. Camila realized. She hadn't laughed in weeks. That night, under the hum of flickering lights and a pipe that dripped steadily behind her cot, she reread the documents she'd saved. Something gnawed at her. Brody had been too careful. too precise. But he'd made one mistake. Among the shredded documents she'd salvaged, there was a partial signature on a document with the words affidavit of support withdrawal. Her breath caught. If he withdrew his support before the divorce was finalized, and without informing her, that could be a violation of USCIS policy. She still had pending applications under his sponsorship. If she could prove he manipulated the system or filed false claims to trigger an investigation, she might still have a chance. At least to stay. Maybe even to fight back. She called. The third number Nancy had circled, Dakota Legal Aid for Immigrant Women. The phone rang 5 times before a voice answered. "This is attorney Linda Keats. How can I help?" Camila hesitated, then spoke everything in one breath. The divorce. The call from immigration. The affidavit. There was silence on the other end, a thoughtful, dangerous kind. "This isn't the first time I've heard of a man doing this," Linda said finally. "But it might be the first time we can prove it." A beat. "Can you come in tomorrow?" Camila exhaled, the air shaking out of her lungs like steam from a boiling pot. "I'll be there." Meanwhile, Brody wasn't done. He'd told himself this would be clean. File the papers, make the call, remove the problem. But something about Camila's silence disturbed him. She hadn't begged. Hadn't cursed. She'd vanished. And Brody, for all his cruelty, feared only one thing, a woman with nothing left to lose. He logged into her immigration portal. Access denied. Then, he saw the alert in his own inbox. "Your affidavit withdrawal has been flagged for procedural review." His face went pale. Camila wasn't running. She was fighting back. The following morning, the roads were glazed in ice. South Dakota had a way of warning you when change was coming. Camila arrived at the Dakota Legal Aid office wrapped in Nancy's scarf and wearing boots a size too big, donated by a shelter volunteer who said, "You're walking into a fight. You'll need solid footing." Inside, the air smelled like old coffee and dry paper. The woman behind the desk, Linda, looked nothing like Camila imagined. She wore combat boots, thick black glasses, and a no-nonsense bun that suggested she'd seen war. Maybe she had a different kind of war. Linda motioned for her to sit and slid a folder toward her. "You said you found a partial document?" Camila handed over the shredded piece, carefully pressed and taped like a fragile relic. Linda studied it for a long moment before nodding. This might be enough. If he filed this without informing you, and your marriage hadn't legally ended, it violates your due process as a visa holder. More importantly, we can argue manipulation and malice, both grounds to request prosecutorial discretion. Camila blinked. "So I won't be deported?" Linda leaned forward. "I didn't say that. I said you might have a shot." A beat of silence. "But it means we fight. Publicly. He'll be notified. He'll be required to submit an affidavit. Under oath. We may even subpoena emails, phone records, anything showing intention." Camila hesitated, not out of fear of Brody, but of becoming visible again. She'd spent days hiding. But that was survival. Now she was choosing something else. "I want to fight." Linda nodded. "Then let's go to war." 3 days later, Brody received a letter from the Office of Refugee and Immigration Affairs. A request for supplemental evidence. A warning that filing a fraudulent withdrawal could result in civil penalties. He stared at the letter, jaw clenched. She lawyered up, he muttered, pacing his kitchen. That night, he logged onto a private legal forum he sometimes used to vet attorneys. His search history, full of immigration terms and hasty queries like "Can you withdraw affidavit during active marriage?" painted a picture of panic. He hadn't thought she had it in her. But then, Brody didn't really know Camila. He had fallen in love with a version of her that was grateful, obedient, dependent. The woman who cooked pupusas for his coworkers and laughed when they mispronounced her name. But this Camila, the one he tried to erase, was doing something he hadn't expected, existing without his permission. At the same time, Camila's life was no less chaotic. She had to check in weekly with Linda. She moved into a temporary women's safe house outside Sioux Falls, sharing a room with a woman escaping domestic violence. She found work at a local bakery that didn't ask too many questions. The pay was miserable, but the flour and sugar soothed her. She remembered her mother's words, "Sometimes you cook not to eat, but to remember you're still alive." Each day she kneaded dough was a small act of rebellion. Each pastry she folded reminded her she still had hands that could build something, even if it wasn't the life she once imagined. The hearing was set for March 2nd. It wasn't a courtroom scene like on TV. No jury. No grand speeches. Just a sterile federal office with metal chairs and harsh lighting. But for Camila, it was the battlefield. She wore a plain white blouse. Hair tied back. No makeup. She didn't want to look desperate, just clear. Brody was already there when she arrived. He stood with a lawyer she didn't recognize, dressed in the same navy suit he'd worn to their courthouse wedding 2 years ago. That memory hit like a punch. He didn't look at her. Linda handed Camila a file. "They're going to try to claim the marriage was always transitional. That he married you to help, and that you overstayed your welcome." Camila shook her head slowly. "He said he loved me. I have proof." "You don't need to prove love," Linda whispered, adjusting Camila's collar. "You only need to prove he broke the law." Inside the small hearing room, Camila gave her statement first. Her voice cracked once when she spoke about the call from ICE. But she never cried. She submitted the copies. Texts. Bank records. Photos. Then came the bombshell, a short video she'd forgotten she even had. A selfie clip from a road trip 6 months earlier. Brody driving. Camila laughing in the passenger seat. "I don't ever want to lose you," Brody says on camera. Camila watched his face when that played back. It flinched, not out of guilt, but surprise. He didn't remember saying it. She did. He took the stand reluctantly. His lawyer objected to almost every question. But the officer overseeing the case was sharp, young, perceptive, and visibly uncomfortable with Brody's cool detachment. "Why did you file for divorce and contact immigration the same day?" she asked. Brody hesitated. "I was advised to protect myself." "By whom?" "My lawyer." "Do you have written legal advice recommending both actions simultaneously?" Silence. No, Camila stared straight ahead. She didn't need to look at him. He had already made himself small. When the hearing adjourned, there was no immediate decision. The officer stated that USCIS would take the evidence under review. It could be weeks, even months. But as they left the building, Linda gave Camila a sideways glance. "That went better than expected." Camila nodded. "Even if I lose, he didn't win." Linda cracked a rare smile. That's what a woman standing up looks like. That night, Brody poured himself a drink and sat alone in his empty house. Camila's scent was gone. Her mugs, her shoes, even the plants she kept alive in the window. The silence he'd once craved was now unbearable. He had the freedom he fought for. And somehow, it felt like punishment. Weeks passed with no word from USCIS. Each day was a slow churn of anxiety and grit. Camila worked at the bakery 6 days a week, starting before dawn. The mornings helped. There was something healing in repetition, measuring, kneading, folding. Flour dusted her apron like a kind of armor. At night, she read immigration blogs, journaled in Spanish, and began studying for her GED, something Brody always said she didn't need. Linda had insisted, "You're staying, so start building. Don't wait for someone to give you permission." And so she did. One Monday morning, a thick envelope arrived at the Legal Aid Center. Linda tore it open while Camila held her breath. Inside was the decision. Her application for prosecutorial discretion had been approved. That didn't mean she had a green card, not yet, but it did mean that deportation proceedings were halted. USCIS acknowledged evidence of possible bad faith and manipulation by the petitioner and granted her leave to apply for a visa independently, under the VAWA provision. Camila blinked at the words. Violence Against Women Act. He never hit me, she whispered. Linda looked her straight in the eye. He didn't need to. What he did was psychological warfare, and the law recognizes that now. Tears came quietly. Not because she was free, but because someone had finally said it out loud, "It wasn't your fault." Meanwhile, Brody received his own letter. It informed him that his attempt to withdraw the affidavit of support during an active marriage had been flagged, and while he would not face criminal charges, he could be civilly liable for Camila's financial support until she became a U.S. citizen or had worked 40 qualifying quarters. The irony? He now owed her support, from afar. On paper, he had to help the woman he tried to erase. The system he thought he could use as a weapon had turned into a mirror. And Brody hated his reflection. Spring came slow in South Dakota. Snow gave way to stubborn patches of ice and brittle sunlight. Camila had moved again, this time to a small studio above the bakery where she now worked full-time. Her boss, Elena, had offered the space rent-free for 3 months. "You keep showing up before me," she joked. "Might as well live here." Camila laughed for the first time in what felt like years. The apartment was small, just a bed, a kitchenette, and a single window facing the alley, but it was hers. No one had a key but her. No one could decide whether she stayed or left. For the first time in America, she felt sovereign. One afternoon, while shelving pastries, she got a call. It was her cousin Maria, from Miami. "I saw your name on a Facebook post," she said, voice thick with emotion. "Someone shared your story, a group for Latina survivors. You inspired people, Camila." Camila didn't know how to respond. She didn't feel brave. She didn't feel like a survivor. She just felt tired and grateful. Linda stopped by the bakery 2 weeks later, leaning on the counter with her usual steel gaze. "I got a call from an immigration outreach nonprofit," she said. "They want someone to speak at a panel in Sioux Falls. To tell their story. Quietly. Safely." Camila hesitated. "Why me?" Linda smiled. "Because you didn't run." That night, Camila stood in front of a small room, maybe 20 chairs, all filled. Most were women. Some with kids. all with that same guarded look she once wore like skin. She told them about the hotel in New York, about the love letters and the wedding, about the cold coffee, the note in the envelope, the SUV outside her window. She told them about the shelter, the scarf, the tape on the shredded document. She didn't cry. But they did. And for the first time, her voice didn't shake. She left with a folder full of thank you notes, and a young woman stopped her at the door. "I was about to give up," she whispered. "You reminded me I don't have to." Camila drove home in silence, a strange calm in her chest. She passed by the neighborhood where she once lived with Brody. The house looked smaller now. Not out of distance, but because it had lost its power. Later that week, she received a letter. Her VAWA self-petition was approved. She was eligible for work authorization and, eventually, permanent residency. Camila lit a single candle and placed it by the window. Not for Brody. Not for justice. But for the girl who stepped off the plane 3 years ago with 2 suitcases. And a heart full of dreams, the girl who almost didn't survive this country. And the woman who did. 2 years later, Camila stood in front of a mirror at the USCIS office in Omaha, Nebraska, straightening the collar of her white blouse. The same one she wore the day she confronted Brody. This time, her hands didn't shake. She raised her right hand, repeated the oath, and became a U.S. citizen. When it was over, she took the small flag they handed her and smiled, not for the system, but for herself. Camila never returned to South Dakota. She now lived in Minneapolis, working part-time at a bakery and part-time with an immigrant advocacy nonprofit, helping other women find their voices. She never saw Brody again. But sometimes, when the spring sun hit just right and the scent of bread filled the room, she thought of everything she'd lost, and everything she chose not to give away. Her name. Her voice. Her place in the world. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Every like, comment, and subscription helps us reach more people with powerful narratives like this one. You can also share this video with someone who might need to hear it. You never know the difference a single story can make. Thanks for listening. Take care. And it is important to know this is a work of fiction. The characters, events, and institutions described are entirely imaginary. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real-life events, is purely coincidental.